Last week was a pretty dramatic week for Cardano projects, and the end of the week seemed to be the reckoning for two Cardano project leaders involved in two totally separate controversies. People got pretty excited about all the details, all the various ethical dimensions of the events that transpired, and there was even a little name calling thrown around. But even at the height of the metaphorical dust up, you know why these two cops look like they're wandering around aimlessly? Because people so far are having an awfully hard time identifying any crimes whatsoever. Did a 23-year-old former community manager spend millions of dollars of our money and fail to deliver on two large projects? Yes. Did a project founder sell his tokens in a project pretty quickly? Also, yes. Should we have expected anything different? Probably not. This is actually our fault. Ready? Let's go. Today, we're going to talk about the Twitter spaces where both Ryan Matovu of Ardana and Orbis and DC of Liquid responded to all the drama. We'll also talk about concern that a Cardano Twitter space aristocracy has formed and the 1-year birthday of DeFi on Cardano. If you can't decide whether these two cops are trapped in a dust storm in the desert or it's just fog on the beach, or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Also, still on the sponsor hunt, if you would like to sponsor one or more of these videos on this channel, please hit me up on Twitter. The end of last week sort of started with this video from Charles discussing the failures of Ardana and Orbis. And Charles expressed his extreme disappointment in this situation, which kind of makes sense. He'd already revealed on Twitter that he was out about $500,000 via his investment in Ardana with the C Fund. You probably already know the C Fund is his venture capital fund where he's a partner with his personal money with Wave Financial. Charles seemed especially unimpressed that he heard the news the same way all of us did, and that was via Twitter. And I know at first, when people first heard that, I think a lot of people in the general Cardano ecosystem public were probably like, wait a second, we know you lost $500,000, but just because you're a bigger token holder than the rest of us, should you really get the news first, or should we all just find out at the same time? And I don't think that was exactly Charles's point. What I took out of this was, since they had been a previous large investor in the project, you would think that if the project was nearing that point when failure was imminent and they were going to have to actually stop building, halt the projects, both Ardana and Orbis, you would think that the leadership of the project would go back to their previous large investors and try to strategize with them a little bit, talk to them about it, see if they wanted to throw a little more cash in to maybe make it a little further down the road, maybe some kind of a little financial bridge to some point in the future where they might have been able to do something to continue the project. But based on Charles's reaction, it sounds like nothing like that happened, at least nothing that he knew about when he made this video. In any case, Charles made it very clear that he and the C Fund were going to be asking some very hard questions, as you would expect from anyone who is looking at a $500,000 loss. Given that there were a lot of hard questions on the way for Ardana, it wasn't long before this Twitter space was announced, and the host was going to be Ryan Matovu himself. So during this Twitter space, it was a mix. First off, there were a lot of people, especially other project executives, who were very polite and asked a lot of very, very relevant questions. And there's quite a bit of information that came to light during the Twitter space. Some of it was a little bit of a relief. Some of it, of course, fit the narrative of how disappointed everybody was about the loss of apparently the $10 million that's gone due to this project. So first of all, we learned that Ryan paid himself $0. Somebody during the course of the conversation, somebody asked him straight up, how much, $10 million are gone. How much of this did you pay yourself? Ryan said 0. And he went on to elaborate that it seems like at least some point in the project, he in fact self-funded the project out of his own pocket. But he says he paid himself 0 to date. There's about $1 million left in Ardana. That's the upshot. The Ardana treasury seems to have $1 million left. But Ryan pointed out there are invoices that still need to be paid. This is no surprise in an ongoing business. Invoices for various services and other things are sort of paid on a delayed basis. And so there won't actually be $1 million left in the Ardana treasury once those invoices are paid. How much is left after the invoices are paid? Who knows? Probably only whoever ends up doing the accounting for all this. They are in talks with certain projects. It sounds like Sunday Swap is one of them. We talked about the Twitter posts from Artem over at Sunday Swap, trying to see if there's some internal infrastructure that's been built or any internal tooling that might have some value. But it sounds like there are actually discussions now about some of the project actually taking over the Ardana project. At least it seemed like that's the way it was being painted on this call. Whether or not anything like that actually pans out, who knows? I mean, the project is open source. So, presumably everything that's actually been coded and built is in the open source GitHub. So there's not a lot of incentive for anybody to pay for what's been coded because it's already available. But who knows? Maybe there's some value in the community or something like that. Maybe somebody will come along and actually take over the project. I'm personally not holding my breath for that, but who knows? We'll see. Maybe we'll get lucky. Somebody will take it over. No idea. We also found out Ryan is the only equity holder of Ardana Labs, which is a Seychelles entity. And he says all of the investment in Ardana to date has been in the tokens. So even Charles's $500,000 investment in Ardana, which was through the C Fund, in which he's a partner with Wave Financial, like we talked about, even that was presumably an investment in the tokens. And Ryan wisely pointed out throughout the Twitter space that he is a citizen of the United Kingdom and Ardana Labs is a Seychelles entity. Of course, he's pointing that out for jurisdictional purposes because he probably knows some people have lost large amounts of money, enough for them to be thinking about some form of litigation at this point. He, of course, didn't mention anything like that specifically, but to me, at least, in my opinion, it was pretty evident what he was thinking about. So there were a lot of questions, of course, about where exactly the $10 million went. So according to Ryan, it sounds like 6 or 7 million of that was spent on development. And it sounds like Platonic Systems and M Labs were working on Ardana. Who knows? Maybe others, but it sounds like those two at least were working on Ardana. And Ryan was careful sounded like he was trying not to lay any blame on either of those development houses. He was trying to step up and take all of the blame on himself. And this was the thing that was the most pronounced to me. He's trying to take the blame for the project, but really the blame should be on all of us who gave him the $10 million. People pointed out throughout the Twitter space that Ryan is 23 years old now. He was obviously younger when he first started raising money for Ardana, and his previous job experience involves being a community manager for a previous project and being involved with some other project. People brought up the tweet from a long time ago where people were criticizing his involvement in previous projects and maybe didn't work out. And he addressed those projects and explained exactly what his role in those projects was. And in fact, in one of them, he was a community manager. And this is where I think all of us, the Cardano community who gave him this money, we have to take a little bit of blame for what's gone down here. Sure, it was Ryan who spent the 10 million and didn't arrive at completion of the projects. He didn't deliver Orbis or Ardana like, of course, any of us were hoping, but we probably shouldn't have given $10 million to a 23-year-old former community manager. Ryan, it sounds like I can't find any kind of like really technical background at all for Ryan. And yet we gave him this amount of money and expected him to manage that budget, deliver these two projects. And instead, he did actually exactly what you'd expect. If I presented this scenario to you, hey, we're going to give $10 million to a community manager. When I say community manager, I'm guessing what he did was things like, go in the Discord and moderate the community discussion. If you give that person $10 million and expect them to manage the work of huge, huge labor forces of developers at some of these development houses, to make sure that that money is being spent wisely, what do you expect to happen? Do you expect him to actually arrive at delivery of his project, or do you expect him to burn through that money, spend it all with the development and other things? Some of the money was spent on other things, of course. There was 10 million, and he says that they spent 6 or 7 on development. Do you expect him to actually arrive at delivery of the projects, or do you expect him to burn through the money before he gets there? Of course, we should have expected him to burn through the money before he got there. This was the story of the scorpion and the turtle. We were the turtle, and our 10 million, us and our 10 million were the turtle. Ryan was the scorpion. He's like, hey, let me ride on your back across the river here. And we're like, okay, you're not going to sting us, right? And he's like, no, not at all. And of course, we get into deep water. He stings us. Everybody dies. We look at the turtle looks at the scorpion and says, yo, why did you sting me? We're both going to die now. And the scorpion says, I'm a scorpion. Scorpions always sting you. This is what happened. 23-year-old community managers. What do they know about managing a $10 million development budget? Of course, they don't know anything about $10 million. We never should have given that amount of money for development of two projects of this magnitude. I think the $10 million just applies to Ardana, actually. But we never should have given a development budget of that big for a project this big to a 23-year-old former community manager. But Ryan wasn't the only project leader who stood up to address some controversy. On Friday, we got this Twitter space with Subcritical, which also included DC of Liquid. We won't go back into all the details because I've already covered it, but DC was a co-founder of Indigo, which launched last week, and it was sort of surfaced that it looked like DC had sold some of his tokens he was allotted as co-founder of Indigo. And the person who had sort of surfaced this was Bison Coin, who came up on stage right at the end of this Twitter space when things got really spicy. But before that happened, DC made some pretty good points about founder tokens or team tokens and crypto startup projects in general. He pointed out they're a lot like these crypto startup projects are a lot like traditional tech startup projects or, Web 2 startups, in the sense that the team that founds a project like this, they're kind of working for years to get to that point where the project is a real thing and there's even a market for these tokens. And the way they're compensated for all that working, kind of in silence and obscurity in the background, the way they're compensated for all of that work and the risk they take on and all of those things, in the traditional tech world, it would have been through equity in the corporate entity. And in our crypto Web3 world, it's often in the form of tokens. I think he makes a good point here because we can't naively sort of expect that founders of projects and other team members are going to work for years on these projects, get these projects to launch, and then never sell their tokens. Sure, you can argue that you might hope that a project founder is just going to use the tokens on the platform. And DC even made a point at some point in this Twitter space saying that he actually did try to stake his tokens on the Indigo platform, but he couldn't get it to. He couldn't. That didn't quite work out. It was right at launch, so there was probably a surge in usage. So maybe it was difficult to do certain things on the platform, just given the amount of people trying to do the same things. So then he saw a bunch of people selling the token, and he figured he should go ahead and sell it. And he did that. He sold the tokens. But I think this is a little bit similar to the situation with Ardana and Orbis. We can't expect that founders aren't going to sell their tokens. Sure, we can hope that founders and other team members won't sell off their allotments. Maybe somehow they'll decide to just use them on the platform, something like that. Or maybe they'll sell them off, but kind of slowly so it doesn't impact the price that much or that quickly. But that's probably all naive. I mean, these are capitalistic ventures, and the machine of capitalism is certainly oiled by greed. If we're being realistic and not being naive, we have to assume that project founders and other team members are going to sell their tokens as soon as their vesting schedule or unlock schedule allows. They're going to sell off those tokens. The reason the vesting schedule exists, the reason there are certain dates on which they get unlocked is because they're going to sell those tokens. If there wasn't any chance they were going to sell those tokens, there would be no unlock schedule. They would just get them and we wouldn't have to worry about it. But that's not the case. All of this works because everybody's trying to make as much money as possible. So we have to assume that the teams are just going to sell off their tokens as soon as they're unlocked. That's the only realistic way to approach this. At the end of this Twitter space, Bison Coin, who's the person who kind of raised this issue in the beginning, he came up on stage, and that's when things got pretty spicy. And the conversation went about as well as you would expect, given that he was the one that kind of unearthed all this. He traced the sell back through, something like 6 wallets, he says, to figure out who was responsible for selling those tokens. And to add insult to injury, he even revealed on this Twitter space that it looked like Liquid had either just received or was in the process of receiving some VC funding. And it looked like DC and Liquid definitely had not planned on revealing that detail. That was scheduled. The reveal of that was scheduled for some later date. But Bison Coin asked him directly about it. And he, at that point, things were already pretty spicy, but he said, yes, there is some kind of an investment, and he even named a few entities. You can go back and listen to this Twitter space if you want to get all those details. Obviously, a lot of people attended these 2 Twitter spaces, with especially the Ardana Twitter space getting, I think, over 10,000 people in attendance. And there was one take on that Twitter space, one piece of that Twitter space that I think might be notable at this point. So this poster had this to say: controversial, honest opinions. Firstly, I really don't like the aristocracy that's developing in all the big Cardano Twitter spaces, and he identifies one account and he says there are some others. I don't even know if the identity of the account is really that important, but he says there's an aristocracy developing, and the accounts involved in that always seem to get a privileged position to front run the crowd and speak, and multiple times too. It doesn't help when their contribution descends the conversation toward feelings, accusations, conspiracies, and hearsay. I personally didn't appreciate that energy today because I felt it distracted from an important learning moment for the community. And then he goes on and talks about exactly what happened. So during the Twitter space, there were a few notable Cardano personalities in there who got a little bit more heated than everybody else. I think there were a lot of recognizable personalities, specifically people who are executives at large projects, like DeFi projects, who are asking really reasonable questions. Like, hey, where did you spend the 10 million? How much is left? How much of that went to you? How much did you pay yourself? What are the chances you can hand this off to some other project? Really reasonable and polite questions, which I think that was appropriate because there were a lot of unanswered questions. And I think the purpose of a Twitter space like that isn't the highest use of a Twitter space like that isn't to vent frustration at the executive of this project that is sort of failing in front of our eyes. I mean, there's certainly utility there for the people venting their anger, but I think there's a lot more utility in getting the information out of that person without putting them in a super emotional state. I think it's a higher utility to actually just get the cold facts out of them and not use that for the venting of anger. So I personally, watching that Twitter space, I personally appreciated the big Cardano personalities who were just after the cold hard facts. Because I mean, that's the important part here. Venting anger at the leader of Ardana and Orbis doesn't really move us forward. It doesn't really create any progress. I'm sure it's very satisfying to the people doing it, but it doesn't really help us. I mean, I guess you could argue maybe it creates some kind of deterrence for future, project founders, but I don't really know if I buy into that. I got a lot more value out of the people who are trying to get to the cold, hard facts. So I kind of agree with this poster here. And he makes a good point about sort of this developing elite class that seemed to show up in every single Twitter space. I think all of us in Cardano kind of probably agree that we're sort of the non-elitist blockchain ecosystem. And there is some value in certain personalities that you know and love, sort of, them being your surrogate sort of question asker because they're going to pose the same questions you would. There's some value there, but this person does make a good point. We seem to have lost a little bit of diversity of personalities in some of these Twitter spaces recently. And I do agree. I do tend to see the same small group of personalities showing up over and over and over again. I don't know if that means we've got this unhealthy or aristocracy problem the poster here is pointing out, but we definitely do see the same personalities over and over again. And some of those personalities were definitely the ones sort of creating that emotionally charged environment, which I don't think creates as much utility as the people just trying to get to the cold hard facts. Leaving all this drama and the scandals behind us, let's finish on a high point. This is a post from 1 year ago, November 26, 2021. MusieSwap posted that they were now live on Cardano mainnet. They said, "We are proud to announce that MusieSwap has just launched as the first decentralized exchange on Cardano." And this was really the birth of DeFi on Cardano. You remember I covered this on the channel at the time, a year ago in November. And nobody knew that MusieSwap was going to launch. They were a dark horse. Nobody had any idea they were out there, at least nobody I knew. And then all of a sudden they were like, hey, how about a DEX on Cardano? Which was great. A lot of people had a lot of suspicions at the time because we didn't know who MusieSwap was. Of course, they've sort of acquitted themselves of those suspicions in the last year. Super glad we reached this 1 year point of DeFi on Cardano. Happy birthday to MusieSwap and DeFi on Cardano. I hope you had a great week, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.